so they did their best to fix me up. And with that, he lowered me to the floor, patted me on the head, and returned his focus to Wheel of Fortune. When I was in early elementary school, I overheard my grandfather talking about his plan to meet his biological siblings for the first time. The adults were standing around the kitchen table long after the Thanksgiving dinner had ended. My grandmother was wiping the counter down, and my aunts were drying the silverware. My mom and dad were returning chairs and tables to storage, and I was supposed to be folding the tablecloth. The steady dance of cleaning, folding, and putting away stopped abruptly. I was keenly aware that this was not a conversation for me, and yet I inched closer, straining to hear. I tucked the half-folded tablecloth under one arm and braced myself against the door frame so I could lean in just a little closer. I couldn't understand how my grandpa had never met his own brothers and sisters. At the moment, mine were chasing one another relentlessly through the basement playroom with several of my cousins. They were making it difficult to eavesdrop, but nevertheless, as I tried to imagine not knowing them, my heart filled with a sense of vast emptiness. Once the dishes were done and the house was returned to order, my parents called us to the car, and we hugged all the relatives goodbye. My mom reminded us to buckle up and then turn the radio to Christmas music. I smiled as I thought about how much I love the Christmas season and our traditions as a family. My brother fell asleep with his head on my shoulder, and my sister softly sang along with the music. I listened to the even tone of my parents' conversation. I couldn't make out the words, but I loved the soothing sound of their voices. Love filled my heart, and I felt like I might burst with affection for my family. My eyes drifted shut, and I began to daydream about Christmas morning. Wait! My eyes shot open as I looked directly at my startled parents. What happened to Grandpa's brothers and sisters? Why doesn't he know them? Is he going to meet them? My dad drew in a breath before reminding me that eavesdropping is rude. Then he told me a little about my grandfather's story. Grandpa lived in a lot of foster homes when he was a kid, but his brothers and sisters were adopted by another family. They have never met, but they just reached out to your grandpa, and they would all like to get to know one another. I pondered this for a moment and then replied, "What's a foster home?" My dad closed his eyes for just a moment, and I could see the words roll around on his tongue before he spoke them. Sometimes a family can't take care of a child, and a foster family takes care of the child for a while. Your grandpa's family couldn't take care of him, so he lived in a few foster homes. But they didn't take good care of him either. I let that sink in for a while as I watched the snow swirl outside my window. My baby brother's hot breath against my shoulder reminded me of a question that had plagued me for years. What really happened to Grandpa's tongue? My dad shook his head, and my mom gave him a warning glance toward the back seat. "I don't know," my dad finally responded. I didn't ask again. I was 12 when my parents started talking about adoption in our own family. I was listening to their conversation from the top of the stairs long after I had been sent to bed. Next to reading by the nightlight, eavesdropping was my favorite late-night pastime. I realize as I type this that I owe my parents an apology for never going right to bed and for listening to all kinds of conversations and television programs that were none of my business. I also fully accept that I deserve the nosy children that currently reside in my own home. That night I strained my ears to hear each detail. They had been watching a television program about children who had been left in orphanages in Romania. I could tell from their hushed tones that they were horrified by the conditions and the lack of resources many of these places had to care for children. They talked late into that night about the mothers who must be devastated to leave their children there, but felt they had no other option. They wondered out loud how this could be happening when families like ours had plenty of room in our homes, more than enough resources, and certainly an abundance of love to give. I don't know if they talked about my grandpa, but I tucked my knees beneath my nightgown and imagined him as a child with nowhere to go.